unpacking today's headlines. This is Souls and Liberty in Depth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to In Depth, a production of Souls and Liberty. I'm Arthur Claroux, and today I will be taking over as host, giving Gary Michael Voris a much-needed rest. Today I'm joined by Jim Ellis, the poll guru and knower of elections, and we're going to be talking about the key states and how things are looking for Trump in this very, very heated election cycle. Hi, Jim. How you doing?
Great, Art. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well.
This is a good subject for today. Yesterday, I was in a polling briefing with a couple of pollsters, and how they described the final few days of this campaign is going to be a knife fight because it's that close. And again, it all comes down to those key states that you mentioned, and they are, and I think the most important, looking from a Trump perspective, are Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. Those three right there. And keep in mind now, the winner needs to get the 270 electoral votes. Each state has electoral votes. It's made up of the number of U.S. senators the state has, which all have 2, and the number of members of the House of Representatives, which is based on population. So that's how we get to the electoral vote count. So a state like Georgia has 16 electoral votes, Arizona 11, and Nevada 6. Now, if you add those up, it's 33. But Trump needs 35. He needs to convert 35 or states that have 35 electoral votes based upon the 2020 map in which he lost. So that's what he has to do. It's easier for Harris because all she has to do is get 90% of the electoral votes that Biden got, and she would still win. And that means she can give up Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada and still win, but she can't give up any more. And if Trump could take all 3 of those states, then all the pressure goes to Harris because then she has to run the table. Because any one state flipping to Trump after that, and again, assuming this all is based upon him keeping the 25 states that voted for him twice, and North Carolina being the weakest of that group. So he has to do that first, then get Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, and then one other state anywhere. But I think those 3 are so important. And really, before Harris got into the race, when it was just Biden, there had been 70 polls since January 1st conducted in those 3 states, and they were pretty much evenly dispersed. And Trump was ahead in all of them, all but one. There was a tie in Nevada. So he was not behind in any of those 70 polls in those 3 states. Now, since Harris has gotten in, that's changed a little bit. She got her sugar high from being from deposing Biden and being installed as the nominee. And then, of course, the convention. But, that began to gel after Labor Day, like we spoke about on this show that would happen. And it did. And now there's probably going to be another little blip for her next week based on maybe a fallout a little bit of the debate. But I think it gels again. And then we're going to be beginning where many states will start to be in the early voting process. And remember, in America now, we don't have election day anymore. We have election month. And that's changed the whole strategy of campaigning now, because it's not a situation where, the October surprise is going to flip it one way or another. If the October surprise is late enough, 2/3 of the people have already voted. So it's a much, much different world now. And again, those 3 states. So right now, instead of leading, it's pretty close to a tie. Most of them, his numbers have rebounded in Arizona pretty well. Nevada, maybe slipping away. They're going to have to pay a lot of attention to that one. And Georgia is just going to be dead even. And that's really tough. And then, if we watch the media broadcasts, they talk about the deciding states being those Great Lakes states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And that is true to some extent. I think those other 3 are more important, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, from a Trump perspective. From a Harris perspective, it is those Great Lakes. If she takes one of those. And most people are now thinking, Art, that Pennsylvania is going to be the real tell. Whichever side wins Pennsylvania very likely wins the election. There was a story on Fox News today that if Trump would win in Pennsylvania, he has a 96% chance of winning the election. And that may be true. And keep in mind, too, when we talk about the 35 electoral votes that he needs, and again, that's dependent upon keeping all 25 states that voted for him twice. And it looks like he will. North Carolina, again, the weakest of that group. But if you have Georgia has 16 electoral votes and Pennsylvania has 19, well, if you add that together, it's 35. And that's the magic number. So he can win with just flipping Georgia and Pennsylvania. And so that's why those states are so critically important and why we pay so much attention to them.
That makes sense. What you were saying earlier, the Great Lakes states slightly less important in this context, in your opinion, than the southern states, the Sun Belt states. Why do you think that is exactly? I mean, besides the numbers.
Yeah, because those southern states set the base for Trump. And if he can take those, then the pressure reverts to Harris. Because, as I said before, then she has to run the table. She has no more margin for error. And she would have to run the table on all the other states that are in the swing category. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. But there are others now that are beginning to show signs of competitiveness. And certainly they were when Biden was the nominee. And those being places like New Mexico and New Hampshire. And for a while, even Virginia, I don't think that's particularly competitive now. But even at that point, let's say it is a little bit, she can't take any chances. So the pressure reverts to her because she can't make any other mistakes. She's got to run the table of all the states that are up in the air. And that's why I think those states are so important, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, because they set the base for victory for Trump. And then he moves out to capture ones that are more difficult than those.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And to be honest, you were saying earlier, a lot of those states still are slightly in favor of Trump, or he still has a decent lead in many of them. Not the same as it was earlier in the year before the bait and switch on Kamala Harris, but
right,
he still is taking.
Then you get into if Trump's underpolling, which he has in most instances, and the Republicans do generally, particularly in the South. The polling data actually in Georgia has been pretty accurate. And so of the southern states, that's been the most accurate. The other ones you can add a little bit to the Republican column generally in the southern states. I always laugh too. New Jersey's the opposite. New Jersey, the Republicans always poll better than they run. So I always take points away from them in New Jersey, but that's not in play. So it's just kind of a phenomenon of the areas. But if you look at Pennsylvania, and I think there's something right now that is way under the radar. And we're seeing this in several places where the voter registration. Now, in America, we've got 30 states that register by political party. So when you register to vote, you choose if you're a Republican or a Democrat, if you're unaffiliated or one of the minor parties. In 20 states, you don't. You just, like my state where I live in Virginia, you just register. And then in the primaries, we can choose whatever primary we want to vote in. But in the states where you're registered, you generally have to vote in that particular primary. So 30 states register by party. Pennsylvania is one of those. And so there's some real interesting statistics going on there. Now, if we look back remember, Trump won there in 2016, very close, and lost in 2020, very close. And so what's going to happen this time? Now, if you look at all the polling history here, he's polling better this year than he did in either of those previous two elections. And I think one of the reasons is you see a change in that state in terms of voter registration. Now, I've got some statistics on that are, I think, quite interesting, because if you look at 2016, now remember, he won the election in Pennsylvania there. And at that time, there was, and here's an exact number, according to the Pennsylvania Secretary of State, there were 916,314 more registered Democrats than Republicans, yet Trump was able to win the state. In 2020, when he lost, that number actually dropped. So the margin between Republicans and Democrats there, the Democrats still had a big lead, but it was smaller. It was only 685,818. Today, Art, That number has dropped again. And the latest report from the Pennsylvania Secretary of State shows the difference between the two parties is just 347,710. So we're talking of almost 600,000 more Republicans in 2024 than there were in 2016. And this gives Trump a much better chance of winning the state because, as we can see, the state's beginning to evolve here over the period. It's interesting that he lost in 2020 when he actually had a bigger Republican base than he had in 2016.
Yeah.
So if that's the pattern, then maybe it's not so good. But I would think logic would dictate if you've got to pool 600,000 more people, or 550 probably, thousand more people that register with you, that's got to help Trump. And this margin is going to be so small that I think we've got a different state. And to a degree, I think the polling is reflecting that a little bit because his numbers are better in Pennsylvania, even with Harris, than they were in the other two elections, keeping in mind he did win one of those two. So Trump winning Pennsylvania is certainly a possibility.
Well, and that's the funny thing. I drove through Pennsylvania earlier this year, and it was amazing because anywhere rural Pennsylvania, there were Trump flags everywhere. And I mean, everywhere. You couldn't drive by a town without seeing them. I mean, there were billboards and signs, and everyone had them out there. In Pittsburgh, you had Harris signs of her. I mean, not from the people, but like billboards that were taken out by the Harris campaign or some super PAC to promote Harris. And so you can see that there's definitely this real push for that one state. And it's obvious why. You've already explained why. Yes. Georgia and Pennsylvania, if he gets those two, that's it. The Harris campaign is toast, right? Yeah. Right. Just real quick.
Election night in the Eastern Zone, look for North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania. See how they're going. If Harris wins any one of those, it's done. If Trump wins them, if Trump wins the first two, North Carolina, Georgia, he's got a chance. If he wins Pennsylvania, he's probably going to win.
Wow. And really quickly, Georgia, just to do a quick overview of that. How are things looking down there?
Oh, it's steady. And so, he was a little bit ahead. Trump has polled behind the regular Republicans. Now, keep in mind in 2022, the Republicans basically swept the state. They won every statewide office, with the exception of the U.S. Senate seat. Remember, the football player Herschel Walker was a Republican nominee, and everybody was going on about what a horrible candidate he was. But he forced Raphael Warnock, the senator, into a runoff, and he only lost the runoff 51-49. So, I mean, it can't be that bad. And I felt that Warnock ran the best campaign in the whole United States in 2022. In fact, I think he was the only major Democrat that did not run a single issue abortion campaign. The rest of them that's all they talked about was abortion. That's all they talked about, every Democrat, with the exception of him. Now, he had more money than anybody else because his fundraising was through the roof. And what he was doing was zeroing in on their local areas. Georgia has a lot of small media markets, and he would go into there. He would go into there with local business people from the area talking about how helpful he's been to them. And I thought that was extremely effective. And so, and that was the only race they lost. So it's not that this whole area is so turning Democrat. The demographics are changing because the African American community is growing. There's only two states where that's happening, Georgia and Maryland. And the reason, and in fact, Pew Research did a study on why is this happening in Georgia? Why is the African American population growing in Georgia when it's not growing in any of the other southern states? And they found that it's African Americans from the other southern states moving to the Atlanta area for job opportunities. And that was the number one reason we're seeing a big switch. And obviously, it's a large number doing that. So the Atlanta area in particular has changed. And that's where Trump's got a problem. And so did Herschel Walker, because there were in the Atlanta metro area in 2022 for Governor Brian Kemp, he received 200,000 plus more votes than Herschel Walker did in the same precincts.
Wow.
And that's Trump's problem too, because, there's a negative connotation about Trump in the Atlanta area. And that's the same problem that Walker had. So that's what he has to
just real, even with there's been a significant shift in African American vote towards Trump. I mean, it's still in a smaller percentage than you'd like. Obviously, I think it's still something like what 80-20 or 75-25.
Oh, if he got 20, he'd win if he got 20.
Okay.
No, it wasn't.
Right, gotcha.
He got about 13% of the African American men. There's a big difference between African American men and African American women in relation to voting for Trump. Trump gets virtually zero from the women. But among men, yeah, he could be around the 20% mark. Particularly the younger black male. Yeah, the younger black male appears to be more open to voting for Trump. Has Harris changed that dynamics? Yeah, probably somewhat. It doesn't appear that she has among Hispanics, but some of the black vote, I think, is returning to her. That's one reason why her polling numbers are better than Biden's. Of course, Biden's were clearly going the other way for reasons we all know. And so with Harris there, it does seem to be coming back. However, and Trump had a great opportunity in the debate to begin to develop that clear contrast between his record and hers, and all of these fabrications she's saying now on these issues, changing virtually every position she's had for 20 years. And even Bernie Sanders says, well, she thinks it's the right thing to do to win the election. Yes, I'm okay. Can you get away with that? Well, we're going to find out. And particularly we come back to Pennsylvania with the fracking issue, because there's videos of her saying she wants to ban fracking, and now she doesn't. So it seems to be the old lawyer's phrase of, are you lying to us now, or were you lying to us then? I mean, I would think they'd want to run some type of theme like that in Western Pennsylvania. And keep in mind on this fracking issue with the shale oil, it's the greatest area for shale in the world, not just the United States. And Trump pointed this out in the debate, I think, very well. They have the two largest plants for fracking in the world, not just in the United States or in Pennsylvania, but they're in Western Pennsylvania. That's why she's changing her position on fracking. It's very easy to understand why, but they have to hold her accountable for that and attempt to exploit it. Now, let's see how well they can do that. They know this. They be the Trump campaign. They know this. The question is, can they do it?
Right. Well, and this is a huge issue too, because there's a few points here. One, I mean, you have a huge, very, very skilled workforce in Pennsylvania that is underemployed at this point in time. So that's huge potential. Obviously, there's another point there with geopolitically, the United States needs this energy. They need energy independence. I mean, yes. The Biden administration just completely depleted or heavily depleted the stockpiles of oil. You're facing a uniting, I should say, region of foreign powers. There's probably the biggest threat since the Cold War coming on, and America's probably at its weakest in a long time. So all of these things play in and should be playing into this decision, not to mention things like just some simple stuff like jobs and creating economic prosperity in a place like Pennsylvania that needs it. Yes. And then just really quickly to Georgia and to the African-American vote, like you said, more young men leaning towards him than before. I think that's part of a larger trend as well of younger men leaning a little bit more right wing. And
they want greater opportunities.
Right, exactly. And what do you think? Like, okay, so this will kind of lead us a little bit into talking about the debate that happened a few days ago. But what do you think Trump could do better as far as messaging to get these points across to people in Pennsylvania and in Georgia, the two states he needs?
I really think they just need to go back to what they did at the convention, which was great, when they concentrated those themes of personal, building wealth, opportunities, economic opportunities, the border, and your personal security as it relates to the border, crime, and foreign affairs. I thought that was great. And all they have to do, I think, is get back to that and continue to run that theme. That's the key theme. And then point out how you just can't trust her. Do you really trust her when she changes her position on every issue? Are you lying to us now, or are you lying to us then?
Yeah. I mean, it really is a simple message.
It's one or the other. It's one or the other. We know which time it's true and which time it's not.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, if like this is a very common trope now, but what has she been doing the last 3.5 years? What's she going to do over the next 4? Is it really going to be that disparate? And you can tell because on their platform too. So this goes back to what you were saying about Brian Kemp. Um, the platform today for Kamala Harris has been stripped down very heavily. There's almost no wokeness involved in it. It's very there. Yeah. You can see who they're trying to target, and that comes back to the message is very clear and very simple. And as a salesman, Donald Trump, you almost want to say, let him go, unleash him, let him just stay on message and just get to those simple points and just repeat it over and over again, because it really is what people want to hear. Hey, I don't want to be mugged or attacked while I'm walking to work. I want to have a job. I want to be able to live well and do better and have, hope for the future and, keep the country safe, keep us secure. It's that simple.
Yeah, it's that simple. And unfortunately, he got off track in that debate and he fell into their trap. I mean, she was definitely a part of their strategy was for her to try to bait him into doing what he did. And it worked. And, of course, yes, it was three against one, but they knew that going. Everybody knew that's what it was going to be when he accepted doing a debate at ABC. Now, this week he said he wasn't going to do any debates any further. And I think that's probably a good move. They need to get the message out in other ways, as I've been saying here. Yes, quit while you're behind on the debate before it gets any worse.
What would you suggest as a final topic here? What would you suggest to the Trump campaign going forward? If you were given an advisory role to get him over the edge there, what would you say?
Just what I said. Drill back down on the message they developed at the convention, which was exactly right. Opportunity, economic opportunity, fixing the border, and personal security as it relates particularly to crime and to foreign affairs. Just like you were talking about, Art, this is the most dangerous time we've faced in decades worldwide. You've got this axis of China and Russia coming together. You've got 3 wars that have sprung up. And then that doesn't even count what the Chinese are doing in the South China Sea, which could easily lead to another point of conflict. And the third point would be the southern border. Ukraine, Israel, southern border, South China Sea. These are real pressure points around the world. And I would think Trump's campaign would say, do you really trust Kamala Harris to deal with these foreign leaders, these foreign dictators like Vladimir Putin and Chairman Xi? I don't.
Well, I mean, she hasn't even
dangerous time for us. And this election will tell us a lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, she hasn't even secured the U.S. border, which is its soft underbelly. Yeah. This is you can have the best military in the world, and the United States does by far. But if you leave your borders open and your heartland exposed, what do you expect? What's going to happen? And of course, your enemies are going to take advantage of that weakness. So
and they're just saying now,
problem there.
You look at some of these politicians in Arizona now. So the new Democratic line down there is there is no problem on the border. So Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona said, no, there's no problem on the border. Then you've got this Tucson, Arizona tight congressional seat. And the Congressman Juan Ciscomani, a freshman Republican, against the woman he defeated last time by about 6,000 votes. And they've got her doing a good ad. They asked, a moderator asks her on an interview, is there a problem on the southern border? And she says, no. Okay. Yeah. So they let 10 million people in. And I'm always amused too, because people say, well, don't use the word invasion. It's not an invasion. What, 10 million people have illegally entered the country. And that may be an underestimation. So, nobody disagrees that D-Day was an invasion of Europe. And I went back and checked the number of troops that were invading, if you will, Europe coming in from the ocean. It was 160,000. So 160,000 constituted an invasion, but 10 million people coming into our country doesn't? So, that just needs to be exploited. Trump clearly was all over that in the debate. There's no question that they're over her on the debate. They know they're vulnerable on her. If their position is no, there's no problem, that's their position now. that tells you how bad they are, that they just can't even spin out of it. So we'll just deny it and know the media will cover us and go on to other subjects and give us cover on it. The Trump campaign can't let her off the hook on that. And so far, they're not doing that, but they need to expand and do better on some other areas.
Absolutely. I mean, you can even extend that and say, look, if you allow something like this to happen and then go with the story that there's nothing wrong with it, this is just managed decline. And what else are you going to apply that same managed decline to?
Right. And I'll tell you what it is. And I'm surprised. I expected Trump to come out swinging on this issue, and he didn't even mention it. And that is the expiration of the Trump tax cuts next year in 2025, because if Congress and the president don't extend those tax cuts, they are eliminated. And that would constitute the biggest tax increase in American history. And I was on a forum, and the ranking Democrat House member on the Budget Committee, Brendan Boyle from Pennsylvania, I was really surprised what he was saying. He even seemed nervous about that. And he was saying and he pointed out that there are actually 70 different tax cuts that will expire if Congress doesn't extend them.
Wow.
And the economic ruin that could cause is immense. I mean, talk about a slowdown. So you have that tax increase, plus, they're going to come up with more trillions in spending. It's just going to be a disaster. And they need to bring that out. I was very surprised that Trump did not bring that out in the debate. In fact, they're calling it tax again if Congress does not act in 2025, and they automatically expire. So if Congress does nothing, there will be the greatest tax increase in American history. And
I think things are bad now.
Yes, things are bad now. You want wait till that happens. and again, I just thought that was a golden opportunity for Trump to really bring that to the forefront and try to pin her down, but he didn't even mention it. So the biggest problem, I think, on the debate was just the missed opportunities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's kind of the summary of all of this and what a lot of people have been feeling the last week, let's say, since the debate, but probably a lot longer, actually, the last couple of months, as far as the messaging is. They need to be able to drill down to the points that matter to people, to the points that everyday Americans are experiencing. Their cost at the pump, that goes up with the new taxes, their own personal income taxes, like everything. It's just going to be that much more difficult, obviously, alongside this managed decline and no end to the same problems everyone's trying to stop right now, or everyone on the right, I should say. So, well, Jim, thank you so much for being here with us today. And all that insight is extremely valuable as people head to the polls very, very soon. Thank you very much, and God bless.